Thank you, Lena, and thanks everybody. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here. Yeah, I've got 30 minutes worth of a presentation lined up here, and I'm pretty excited about it. I haven't had a chance to report on the results of this project work package yet in such a format, so this is really quite special for me. So you're kind of the first to hear it, so this is kind of cool. Yeah, so as Lena says, my name is Matt, and I'm a research fellow at Aarhus University. And I've been working in maritime since about 2013 when I started my PhD together with Danish Maritime. And Danish Maritime is an interest organization primarily for the shipbuilding sector here in Denmark. So covering our 8 large shipyards with over 200 meters long capacity to build. And so I'm from the Minnesota, which is a very landlocked part of the United States, except for the last of the Great Lakes, Lake Superior, bumps up into Duluth in the northern part of the state. So maritime is quite new to me, but it's been a fascinating run, and I've got to do some really cool things with some really cool partners and projects along the way. So and with Danish Maritime, so this is get into my academic side. My job was to travel around to the members. Now they have over 150 members, and help them with getting started with the toolbox of strategic foresight. So earlier, before 2013, I was working for the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies. Right, that's kind of where I got warmed up to these tools and methods of future studies and foresight, and then brought them into the maritime sector, and have been doing that basically quite intensively since 2013. And I got involved in EcoProDigi in 2017. I was actually part of writing that application, but my role in that project was really scoped out in this work package for that kind of hit basically at the end of 2017. So, or I'm sorry, at the end of 2019 and 20. So, so our mandate inside of EcoProDigi was to build a policy innovation roadmap towards the year 2030. So it was essential to be able to scout out and identify the technologies and the policies as well that are expected to come into effect over the next 10 years. So what are we doing here? We're essentially building 2 roadmaps. And they're published now and on the EcoProDigi website. So one is called The Road to Shipyard 4.0. And the other one is called the Roadmap for Integrated Ship Operations. I'll drop these in the chat bubble in case you want to go get them here. Let's see here. Well, I guess it's going to EG.eu's website and click on publications. You can be able to find them there. I am interested in sharing those because we'll be going through these 2 bluish roadmaps here today, and to be able to go through them effectively, there's something of a guide to what is it that we're talking about inside of these reports. And so there's always more language in there about what are we talking about when we're talking about these things. The issue here is that there's over 50 elements that I'm going to try to blow through in this presentation over the next, 25 minutes or less. And that would really require that we take this bird's nest point of view, right? Because to cover the future of shipbuilding and ship integrated logistics and operations in 25 minutes for the next 10 years, good luck, right? So, so what I want to do now is to back up and then talk a little bit about how we built these roadmaps, because there's some caveats that need to be made. Because what are we doing? Are we really predicting the future with these roadmaps? So we were starting out on this project, right? We were really looking and doing a lot of say scouting. We were asking and doing interviews and asking people, what is the future of shipbuilding and integrated ship logistics? And now when I say integrated ship logistics, we're really focused here in this project on ro-ro shipping, right? I know it's not shipbuilding, right? But it's not exactly the most, there could be segments of shipping that are more distant to cruise shipping than ro-ro shipping. So we were identifying these events, and then the challenge that we had was then to put these years on them, right? So where in the are these events going to happen, right? And that's a bit more of a challenging and kind of daunting kind of task. So we used a method called the wisdom of the crowds to do this. So a guy named James Surowiecki popularized it back in 2004. And Surowiecki basically says that there are situations in which if we go and ask a number of people a question and then take either the mean or the median answer to those questions of all of the answers that we get, that we can actually come up with something of a better guess, right? It's not a precise prediction, but it may be better than most other individual guesses. So for example, if I asked everybody to guess how many jelly beans are in this jar, the chances are that nobody's going to get it certainly perfectly correct, right? We all try to do that. I mean, imagine that we're incentivized to do it as if there's a prize if you're the closest one. Well, the fact is that if we take the median guess, or the guess that has the difference between the lowest number and the highest number, and take the one right in the middle, we're probably going to be better than, in this case, it's going to be 97% of the guesses, right? And so it also works with the average or the mean in some situations. But the problem is if somebody came into our data set and said, okay, that's going to happen, or how many jelly beans are in there? There's 5 million. Well, that would really skew our data, right? And that would be really throw us off. So we're really, in this case, looking for median dates to talk about the future. And then something of a disclaimer here is that we started this project again in 2017, and we were building our roadmap then in early, these two roadmaps throughout most of 2020, like during this pandemic. And then when we went to the crowd to get these dates, right, we were doing that in October and November, if I remember correctly. And so coronavirus was around, but we can't know for sure, but we would hope that people have calibrated their forecasts, right? When people are asked to say how many years into the future that these events are going to happen, that they had already been a little bit calibrated because of the impact of coronavirus. It doesn't mean that what I'm about to say isn't still subject to more coronavirus, right? Because we know that if we, for example, I mean, if we have some sad cases where we lose, key employees with key skills, that those projects are just going to get delayed, right? But we can kind of hope that we're going to be able to push forward, and we'll see. I guess the true test of the accuracy of these roadmaps would be to look back from 2030 and say, okay, how well or how bad were these when we look back at them? And so the roadmaps here, we'll start with this one, the digitalizing shipyard operations. And I'll have got something of a way to kind of work through these as we kind of go down. I'm using this Miro space to do this now. So I'm going to do it kind of in themes, which makes it a little bit easier to get through rather than going through them one by one. So I'll grab a few themes I think of being kind of major core components of first the shipyard operations and then the integrated shipper operations later. So digitalizing shipyard operations, right? So we've got something of our first track. We'll call it welding. This is the same roadmap, just with some circles on it. So what we've got happening, starting out in the near future, right? So we're talking 2023 here, right? As far as welding is concerned, right? Being one of the major key core competencies of the shipyards, right? In 2023, we're going to start monitoring welding in real time. So we're thinking cameras hanging on bodies, right? As the welders are going through the welds, to be able to track and understand, okay, and even do, say, something of a quality assessment as that's being tracked. Right? By 2024, we're going to be using this data to improve task training and handover. So the videos that we record from, say, not only welding, but other tasks as well here, right? But we're going to be using that to show people, and new employees especially, right, what is it that we're looking for, right? Now, it's not to say that we're not already doing this in some pieces, right, and in certain different ways, right? And not that it's not already being trained in schools this way, but there are situations in shipyards that are unique to them, right? So we'll be looking to do those kinds of unique situations and training there. And so by 2025, right, we've assessed that we're going to be using artificial reality, virtual reality, and 3D simulation to do this task training. So now we're taking this into another dimension, right? So the task training then is going to be, say, more of an environment that you enter into, right? Maybe even rehearsing certain tasks before you actually have to go do that task. And we'll come back to that the idea of simulation and rehearsal a few times. Now, by 2027, though, we've got autonomous robots, right, coming into the picture. So what does that mean for our welders, right? So all this money that we've just spent on task training and welding and improving the handover of tasks, right? All of a sudden, we've got automated robots, and especially flexible robots, right, really reaching into the hard to reach areas, right? So snake robots, for example, right? Automated, partially automated is probably, and how automated are they is a big question. Now, I'm no expert in shipbuilding, right? This is not, I'm not here to claim that these are, predictions that are going to hold through the future. And there's another saying that I would caveat here is that, the future is already here. It's just unevenly divided, right? Or unevenly distributed. And that means that there are elements of this already hanging on inside of already here in shipbuilding. Now, the extent to which they become common practice is a very core concern inside of these predictions, right? So when do they become common practice, right? That we're doing things in such ways, okay? And so that means that they are also then commercially available, so that you're able to buy these perhaps off the shelf, these kinds of solutions, right? And they're no longer just a pilot, but the pilot's been approved. Okay, this is the same map over again, but now we're going to look at these red ones here, right? This has to do with the 3D scanning and digital twinning world, right? Can you read that yet? It's rendering, there it goes. So in 2025, we're going to have a breakthrough in standards for 3D scanning. And so once we have these file formats, industries, a whole lots of new opportunities start really opening up. And then I would probably back up and talk about, we're going to be using aerial drones in 2025 as well to perform incremental 3D scans at yards. So imagine you're flying these drones over the ships, right? At first you fly it over the hull when it's empty, right? And then you're flying it over the engine, and then the layers as they're put on top, and establish this 3D twin, right, with the real data that you can get from aerial drones. And I understand that there are already pilot projects that are trying to crack this, but this should be common practice by 2025. By 2027, right, we're going to be sharing these digital twin files across stakeholders, right? So doesn't even necessarily, it goes beyond than just the ship owner and the shipyards, but right, we're talking classification societies as well, and insurance companies, because of that standardization. So the standardization will allow those files to start really moving across the ecosystem. That also means that in 2027, that we'll have digital twins being used for virtual delivery inspection, right? So before the ship actually arrives with its order, especially think retrofits here, right? We're going to actually delivering those digital twins instead primarily so that the planning can begin before the ship gets into port, right? Be able to minimize the mistakes. So 2027 for that one. And 2028, right? They're really being used in planning and repairs, right? So being able to work with those CADs and drawings. So what's next for these next red circles? I call them yard management, right? For lack of something that kind of captures what's going on here. Maybe you've got a better word for it. Maybe operations, but I think of more of administration, right? So right here on our doorstep in 2023, we've got real-time planning tools to track and track progress and report problems coming on. We understand that there's already projects working on this, right? But this is when it really comes into effect and it starts having its impact. And then we've got a number of these talking about AI, right? So the ability to train, right, these algorithms to look for patterns to help us then be better at the administration of these yards, right? So we've got that for anticipating, forecasting events, and then we've got 2025 using the AI systems to control and manage warehouse inventory, right? So it's already starting to order things for us, right, and manage our suppliers a little bit better, checking up on documentation, making sure that work orders are being signed and stuff. Also, now outside the warehouse, but also in the yard, we've got in 2027 aerial drones starting to perform basic services, right? So delivery of goods and tools of under 25 kilos, for example, right? Moving around yards, right? Where you can ask the drone to go pick something up for you and then have it delivered up to the sites where they're needed. We'll have another advancement in drones by 2028, right? We'll see these drones, autonomous drones, not necessarily aerial, but also on the ground here. Something like these unmanned lifting vehicles, displacing tractor operators here out in the yard, and then the drones in the warehouses. So we'll see a lot more automation, a lot more Amazonification, if you will, going forward. So then we got the last, this is the last one. I call this one Other, and we just kind of touch on the things that we haven't kind of mentioned. So I'll go kind of through these as soon as it's ready to render here. Let's see if I zoom in. So we've got, this is 2025, biocide-free coating innovations surpass toxic anti-fouling paints, right? That is going to require something of a network to implement, right? So we might need new machines, right, to adapt to that kind of coating solution. We've got additive manufacturing of spare and missing parts. Now this is common practice at yards, right? By 2026, right? 3D printing is another word for that, right? And then we've got something of microgrids being implemented in 2026 at yards to supplement electricity needs, helps the yards then access and store more renewable energy, for example, to make their profile even more green, right? Might include cold ironing also inside the yards for the ships that are coming in, right? May not be batteries by that time, right? It could also, we left open the technology to say, look, it could be also renewable fuels, the methanols and ammonia, for example, could be used instead of microgrids, but it still provides that renewable backup or energy supply by 2026. 2029, we've got 3D printing, right, moving to another level of sophistication where forecasts are saying that we're going to be using 3D printing to start to print the large blocks, right, at the yards in 2029. And then we've got another quite radical forecast here in 2030 that composite materials are being used for large vessel hulls. So I mean, the extent to which these two kind of tie together are quite interesting. Now, when we ask all of the respondents, right? And so the people that we asked in the crowd, they had some experience. I think the average person had something like 7 or 8 years of experience in the shipbuilding industry, or the when we looked at the respondents. But you have to take into account that there were many respondents that would look at these one by one, right? And they would say, well, that's interesting and it's novel, but it's just never going to happen, right? So there's this box for it will never happen. And so what we find is that the further that we get out into the future, right, on this roadmap, the further down we get, the more likely it is that people are starting to click that it's never going to happen, right? And there's also a spot to say that in the respondents that if you rate it at 0, it means that it's already here, right? And so the ones that are hanging up in the very top, right, are the ones that are where respondents were. These ones are the ones that would be more, respondents would say, look, this stuff, it's already here, right? And then gradually, as you get down through the roadmap, right, it's never going to happen. So now I have this other roadmap for digitalizing integrated ship operations. I understand. Let's see here. I don't know, Lena, I want you to make the call on this. Now, I've got 5 minutes left. So I think we cut it there, right? These reports are open and up on EcoProdigy's website, but, you know, to get through 50 of them, right, is just, yeah. But what would I say about this one? We've got, I would say the main patterns that we see would be that connectivity is a big thing, right? So with connectivity and having stable internet connections at sea, it opens up really a whole bunch of new activities that we should see. And then there's a lot that'll happen on shore and at ports, especially with cargo, right? This is ro-ro shipping again, right? But the sophistication of the ports to be able to play a larger part in that logistical ecosystem is just going to be quite interesting. And then we've got on the very kind of short to midterm horizon, a lot about vessel optimization, a lot about machine learning and AI coming into the machine rooms, right, and coming into the offices to say, hey, look, we can optimize the fuel efficiency of these vessels, right, quite a bit here now with these advanced tools that we have. And these should be off the shelf, I think, in the short to medium term. And then everything that's kind of left over on the map, you see, are a lot of regulations, right? So it looks like 2025, 2026 is a big year where we've got like ship owners being taxed on their CO2 emissions, right? Now there's a lot of pressure in the EU, right? And they're really working on this right now, I think, as we speak. So it's very cool to see that happening in the progress being made. But the implementation of that kind of effect, right? It's 2026, according to our crowd. So don't shoot at me, shoot at our crowd, right? And then we're taxing bunker fuel the year after that, which is kind of really cool developments, I think, from an environmental standpoint, right? So yeah, so I will then stop sharing my screen, or I can continue to share, but I'll stop sharing and see if there's any comments or questions. I mean, oh, now I found the chat bubble. There they are. Thank you, Taiho, for getting those publications up there.
I was wondering that while this timescale is quite restricted until 2030, which in this branch is pretty short timescale, I think. So how much did you have these differences or really kind of a weak signals, if you like to put it that way, in your data? Or what kind of a really different ideas were involved?
So let me get the question correct here. So you're asking, we've got these weak signals that are popping in here. Are we asking about what's going on beyond 2030? That's not the question. It's something else.
Like in your data. So where people kind of agreeing that these are the things, or were there also persons who thought very differently that this might not happen, or
we didn't really give them a chance to think differently, right? Because they're kind of here's the event, rate when you think it'll happen, right? So there's no room for discussing these. So that discussion about which ones go in and which ones stay out, that happens a long time before we take it to the crowd, right? And there were so many that we threw away, right? That never made it in here. That could also be considered weak signals. And we throw them away for all sorts of reasons. I've actually got a paper coming out about all of the things that we threw away. Not all of those issues, but why we have to throw them away, right, in the production of these kinds of roadmaps.
Yeah, that kind of a trash can is always pretty interesting from the perspective of future studies. What we ignore, what we think it's total rubbish, then we, all of a sudden we might find there as this is the
So what we end up publishing is something that we feel comfortable with as, hey, here's a baseline roadmap that everybody can kind of agree with, right? You're not really able to really put the super radical stuff on there. I mean, for ro-ro shipping, I think the most radical one that we had was something about lashing robots, like robots performing lashing operations, right, on deck to lash, right? And and so that is where we have this kind of line in the sand. We say, okay, don't go crazier than that, right? Keep it. That's about the threshold. And so some of them actually become these kinds of self-guiding bumpers or barriers to what we're able to even put on there, right? There were things like using. Like, when will the bridge be so integrated that you can get it onto a game controller, right? So like an Xbox controller to just steer a whole ship, right? So like that is where that's not in here, because that's where you meet so much resistance. That will never happen. I think about 40% of respondents to that one think it'll never happen, which is probably a decent indication that it won't, right? But who knows? Like, it may not look like that, but again, this isn't a great place to end your thinking about the future, but a great place to kind of start the discussion. Okay, what does this mean? Okay, what does this mean for us? Right? Do we believe this? What don't we believe about it? How do we think differently than what Eco Prodigi has been able to put up in the roadmap? Right. So that's why I would encourage those publications, because you'll see more language behind each of these. Right. And then you can say, okay, they got it right here, but they got it wrong here. Right. And we're totally okay with that. Right. We're not, I mean, our mandate, like, they told us to predict the future. Like, go predict the future. Like, okay, all right, we'll get right back to you. So, but this is kind of what we kind of settled on, is this kind of baseline understanding of something of a consensus forecast of the things that are expected to happen. But of course, it's up for debate, and that's the point of it. Like, debate it, print it out and give it to your colleague at work, and see if what they think about it, right?
Yeah. So. Okay, but anyone, would you like to say something so that also that this is kind of we have already done everything, what is roadmaps, or this is something that we won't do, or anything, if you like to comment, or also give us maybe guidelines how to approach these futures ideas in our project.
Yeah, I think you touch on another interesting thing here, is that I think these are all little development projects. Of course, it's very few of them are really hitting at the core competencies. I mean, except for like the 3D printing of alternative materials for hulls. I mean, I think we see a lot of that happening in the universities. At least in Denmark, we know that they're trying to figure out how to 3D print wind turbine blades, right? The big ones, right? So they need to make that material so hard. But I think but anyway, when you look back and take a step back and look at these roadmaps, they're interesting that Now we've put a date on these events in the future. And so this becomes an expectation. And now I write a lot about futures and foresight science from a sociological perspective. And so from sociology, we've got this concept called the self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So if you say that something's going to happen and you give it a date, right? So now you're conjoining not only the event that you're expecting to happen, but the date as well, right? And we also have control whether or not it actually becomes a reality, right? We're generating what they call this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So that people start looking at it and then they can organize resources around it and then actually make it happen, right? So that's kind of not like the hope of this, but we would expect that those kinds of effects from this kind of roadmap to happen.
Yeah.
If it's ever picked up and used, right? Okay. Like in that way.